of David with Gerald Flurry.
Greetings, everyone. We've had 4 world-ruling empires in history, and God, in the Bible, labels them all beasts. In other words, they acted like beasts, and so God labeled them the same. If we look at what is happening in this end time, you could say it's almost like we have 4 world-ruling empires all at once. You have Iran, that's mostly controlling the Middle East. You have Germany, that's absolutely dominating Europe. And you have Russia and China and all their power, and they're taking territories in their areas, and they have nuclear bombs and are very powerful. The only one of those 4 that doesn't have nuclear bombs is Iran, and they're about to get nuclear bombs anytime, perhaps next month or the next or the next. This world, this violent world, is becoming one big military arsenal of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, all kinds of conventional warfare armaments. But as we look at these powers of the world, they keep expanding their military as the United States and Britain shrink theirs. Does that really make sense to you? What is happening in this world, and what is happening to America and Britain at this time in our history? Now there are intelligence reports indicating that some of those jihadists returning to America and Britain from that warring Middle East may very well introduce biological and chemical warfare into our countries because they're being directed by other powerful nations. That's terrorist sponsoring nations. And you can see not only in one nation, but in all 4 of these nations and in other areas, that there's a sea change in the way this world is going, and how violent it is becoming, and dangerous, and certainly very evil in ways it's hard to describe. This is a far more dangerous world than it was, let's say, just 10 years ago, 1 decade ago. But there's a stupendous prophecy in the Bible that actually explains all of this and tells you what it's all about. One specific prophecy. And I'll tell you, you need to understand this because it's leading to the most massive disaster in the history of man, and these military monsters are going to bring it upon us with, of course, many followers that they have. But God says He will protect you in amazing, miraculous ways if you please Him. Now that's a wonderful promise that He makes to us if we'll just abide by what He says we should be doing. But there is this one specific prophecy I want to get to in a few moments to talk to you about that explains all of this and labels it and names it and tells you what it means. Here's what Winston Churchill said after World War II, quote, "Mankind has never been in this position before without having improved appreciably in virtue or enjoying wiser guidance. It has got into its hands for the first time the tools by which it can unfailingly accomplish its own extermination. We can now exterminate human life." Now that's like the ultimate achievement of man, but it's far worse today than it was in the days of Winston Churchill. All of what he said is coming to pass. And I want to show you what is happening even in God's own church in this end time when they ought to be warning the world as never before. Notice Isaiah 56 in verse 9. This is an end time book. And you can write for our Isaiah booklet and see that for yourself. It is for this end time, and it was written in a book so we could understand it in this end time. And God has revealed it in this end time. Verse 9, All you beasts of the field come to devour, yea, all you beasts in the forest. God is talking about these Gentile beasts that are coming upon us in this end time to devour. And there's never been anything like it in the world ever before. That's what he's talking about. Verse 10, his watchmen are blind. That is God's watchmen. They are all ignorant. They are all dumb dogs. They cannot bark, sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber. And so here in this end time, 95% of God's people are turning away from Him and have turned away from Him. And yet all these ferocious Gentile beasts are rising on the world scene. Most of God's people are slumbering and not even warning this world of what's coming, because most people simply do not understand what's happening in this world. They don't understand it, and they need to understand it. It's the worst time of suffering ever on this earth that has already started. And it's going to get a lot worse unless we make some massive changes. But this is all an end time prophecy. And here God is saying, well, all these beast-like monsters are devouring people and nations. And 95% of God's own people don't even understand it and won't even proclaim and warn this world as they once did. But there is a 5% remnant that is doing that, going ahead and carrying on with that job. But there should be a lot more doing it, and there should be an even more powerful message than what there is. But think about this. If you had a house and it was surrounded by lions and bears and wolves and other beasts, and your dogs were just lying there and not barking, well, you'd get rid of those dogs, I would think. But God says that's the way it is with His own people for the most part. And certainly that applies to other leaders in this world. But you can look at Jeremiah 30 and verse 7, Daniel 12 and verse 1, Matthew 24 and verse 21, and God says there's going to be suffering like that is just unparalleled in the history of man, right here in this end time. And He has major prophecies to prove that to us and warn us about what is coming upon this earth and how we can turn it around if we would. But even if the nations don't, well, individuals can. And God will look after those individuals. But there is this one great prophecy where God describes all this that I want to get into in a few moments. These world-ruling beasts are really beginning to demonstrate their power. Notice verse 11 of Revelation 10. And He said unto me, you must prophesy again. Well, again, because the church stopped. They did prophesy. They had all kinds of power that God gave them, and they prophesied, and then they stopped and rebelled against God. And God says now we have that His little remnant has to prophesy again, just before the second coming of Jesus Christ. And He said unto me, you must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. Prophesy again. You did it once, now you have to do it again, and it's far more urgent now than it was before, because we're already entering into that unparalleled suffering. Notice verse 1 of the next verse, which is chapter 11 and verse 1. And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood saying, rise and measure the temple of God, or the church of God, and the altar, the ministry, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months. So these Gentile beasts are going to just tread all over Jerusalem before this is over. If people don't wake up, and it's going to happen, they're going to do it for 3.5 years. It is the greatest storm ever to strike this earth. It is that bad, and it's building even now. You can see the storm building all around this earth. And Christ explained it in one prophecy that we'll get to shortly. God touches on this mighty biblical prophecy here where he's talking about the Gentiles just treading down Jerusalem. That's what they do. They just tread all over people. And they cut off their heads, and they do all kinds of horrific acts like that and think nothing of it because they act like beasts. They are beasts in that sense. They are monsters. Now that's why God calls them beasts. And he says now his own people won't even warn about those beasts and what's happening on this earth. And that's the greatest tragedy of all. But God has a prophecy, and he's going to explain that to us so that we can understand it. And I'm going to help you to understand it today, I believe, in a very clear way. If you look, for example, at China today, there's a lot of tension now between China and the U.S., and China is going out and making a series of man-made islands 800 miles from their shore in the South China Sea. And of course that land belongs to others as well as to them. They're out in international waters, but they are just building military bases there. And 1/3 of the world's commerce flows right through that area, that South China Sea. 1/3 of the world's commerce, and the U.S. has dominated that area since World War II. And now China is challenging them openly before the world, saying, we're going to dominate this area from now on. And nobody's stopping them. Nobody's even really talking about it that much, as if, well, it didn't really exist. But look, that isn't their territory. They're pushing their neighbors around and taking parts of their territory. And where is this going to lead? They have all this power. Now they've decided they're going to shift from defense to offense. Before, they've been concerned about controlling their 1 billion people to make sure they keep their government intact. Now they've got that under control, well under control, and they're going to go on the offense. And let me tell you, this should frighten the world with all those people. And Revelation talks about an army of 200 million soldiers. And you know where a big part of those soldiers are coming from. But this is what's coming upon us. All these prophecies that God gave us to understand. But they're building up their defenses, and they've been adding to their armaments and their defenses for 20 years. At the same time, America and Britain have been shrinking theirs. Now, what does that mean for this world? America certainly has been a peacekeeper for this world for a long time, and we've had peace because of America's noble efforts and their power. But where is it today? Where is it today in America and Britain? And they both brought a lot of peace to this world. Well, anyhow, we have dominated that area in the past, but we're not dominating it now. And I'll tell you, when a nation like that goes on the offense, that is something that ought to make people really fearful and strike a certain amount of tension in everybody, because they have nuclear bombs and a lot of people to sacrifice, more than any other nation, military, powerful nation on earth, really. But you see, once they get established there, nobody's going to get them out of there unless they are willing to have a nuclear war. They're not going to do that. Now you see the power that they have. You see what Russia's doing in the Ukraine by just taking, almost control of that whole country. Germany is just dominating Europe. Iran is strangling the Middle East. ISIS is small and compared to the power that Iran has over there. But let me tell you, you need to know, and we all need to understand, that this is going to impact every individual on this earth. Every one of them. They're all going to be impacted. Let's look at where God talks about this specific prophecy and what he labels it. Verse 20 of Luke 21, and when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies. Now, you think immediately, well, that means Arab armies, but it doesn't. It's a European army led by Germany. And they're going to get a lot more powerful and a lot more assertive shortly. And you're going to see that happen. And then know that the desolation thereof is near. Verse 22, for these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. God says all prophecies are going to be fulfilled. 90% of all the prophecies are for today, and God says all of them are going to be fulfilled. All of that 90% in this period of time, they're going to be completed. From the beginning of the end of the days until the end of them. But then verse 24, notice this one carefully. Here is a foundational scripture that we need to understand. Prophecy for us today. Verse 24, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And that Jerusalem prophecy applies to a lot more than the little Jewish nation in the Middle East. And if you don't understand that and who the Gentiles are, you need to get our book on the United States and Britain in prophecy, and all of that will be proved to you explicitly so anybody can understand it. But here we talk about, Con Coughlin of the Telegraph newspaper of the UK said that there's been a remarkable sea change in the strategic thinking of China. Well, look, there's been a sea change in the thinking of all of those powers from a few years ago. Germany's a little slow, but they've got the power, and they've got the might, and they've got the economic power to do what they need, what they're going to do in the future. But you see the signs, these are signs that the beasts are getting control of the earth. Those Gentile beasts, in the past it's been, frankly, for the last 300 years or so, we can say, it's been Britain and America that have really helped to bring peace to the world. And now we have grown weak. And look what's happening. Carolyn Grick of the Jerusalem Post wrote this: the most terrifying aspect of the collapse of the U.S. power worldwide is the U.S.'s indifferent response to it. In Europe and Asia and the Middle East and beyond, America's most dangerous foes are engaging in aggression and brinkmanship unseen in decades. Well, other people see that. You see, China not only is asserting themselves like I just explained, but it wasn't very long ago until they gave mobile missile launchers to North Korea, who has the nuclear bomb, and most people would say, most authorities would say, a not so stable government. And God says these men are like beasts. Do you think that China is our friend? Because they can take those missile launchers now and they can hit the United States with nuclear bombs from North Korea, of all places. Does that make you feel secure? Where is this all leading? Well, this is the times of the Gentiles. It's not like it was when Israel or the U.S. and the U.K. ruled the world in a, let's say, a peaceful way. They didn't rule it like the Gentiles. Now, they're decadent today, And certainly God is going to punish them if they don't change their ways, but they're not going to be able to help the world. Today, Britain doles out billions in foreign aid as they cut back billions in their military. Does that make sense? God even has a prophecy for them, and it says they're like a silly dove. That doesn't make any sense if you understand the history of this world and these beasts and what they do when they get power. Have we forgotten all that history of the past? Even that in World War II and their concentration camps and all of the evil that was demonstrated by that power. God says it's going to get so bad that there are going to be mighty generals that are going to whimper like little children when all this comes to pass. If you think that isn't going to affect people, well, you'd better think again. Verses 26 and 27 says, men's hearts are failing them for fear because of all these things that are happening. Verse 34, and take heed, he says, take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life, and so that day come upon you unawares. For as a snare shall it come upon all of them that dwell upon the face of the whole earth. Watch you therefore, and pray always, that you may be accounted worthy to escape. Accounted worthy to escape. That's a promise from God, and He will fulfill it. He always does. But be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and stand before the Son of Man as He returns at the conclusion of the times of the Gentiles. Jesus Christ is going to be the conclusion to the times of the Gentiles. A few years ago there was a conference in Jerusalem that was planned, and I think that all came to pass as far as I know. They were inviting, they called it the President's Conference, and it was entitled Facing Tomorrow, the President's Vision for the Conference. So they had this conference as far as I know, and this man was saying this about the conference over in Jerusalem. He wrote about it, one of the men preparing for it. He said, now I'd like for you to pay special attention to this. It's interesting, I think. Across the millennia, the echoes of the biblical prophets have been heard, repeated, and often gone unheeded. Christ says, take heed. Take heed. Well, Jesus Christ said that when He was on this earth. Notice, I'll just paraphrase Matthew 23 and verse 33, where it says, you serpents and you generation of vipers. Christ was saying to the Jews, but He's saying it to all of humanity. This is the way they've treated God's Word and God's leaders and God's prophets and God's messengers. He says, you kill and you crucify the prophets that I send. Verse 34, read that yourself. And he says, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often would I have not gathered you like an old hen gathers her little chicks, but you wouldn't have it done. You kill the prophets instead of listening to them. Well, that's not a very pleasant prophecy, but that's what Jesus Christ prophesied when He was on this earth. Now, what is the solution? He gave us that solution. And He tells us here how it's going to be corrected. Verse 39, for I say unto you, you shall not see me henceforth till you shall say, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. In other words, anybody that God sends, He says, you won't see me again until people have that attitude all over this earth. Isn't that going to be wonderful? But Christ is not going to, we're not going to see Him till people are conditioned and ready to repent of their evil and listen to what God says, so we don't have to experience these horrors and nightmares that are coming upon us. And all you have to do is just look around. Now in America, I tell you, we're just not paying attention to much of anything, and Jesus Christ condemned the Pharisees for not reading the signs of the times. Can you read the signs of the times? Do you know this is the times of the Gentiles? Do you know that's what it is? And do you know what that means when these beasts rule the world? It's not the same as when more peace-loving nations control it. But there have been surveys taken where Americans are very glum and negative, and they just see their nation kind of slipping away, and it's no longer leading the world like it used to. This is a different world, and it leaves them anxious and tense and glum and negative. But all of that could change, you see. But God says there's one thing you need to understand. Read it in Revelation 12 and verse 14. He says, I will protect my people. You obey me, and I will protect you through all of this. Until next week, this is Gerald Flurry. Goodbye, friends.
Never has mankind seen times like these. Revelation 11 calls this age the times of the Gentiles. Ferocious Gentile beasts are rising on the scene, but God's church remains asleep. America and Britain are naive and complacent. China has turned its focus from maintaining its population of 2 billion to challenging America's world dominance. Germany now rules Europe. Iran will obtain the nuclear bomb in a matter of months. These Gentile powers are becoming more aggressive all at once. World leadership is shifting into brutish hands. But there's no reason to feel depressed. God yearns to gather mankind into His loving arms and shelter them from the evil that is coming. He promises to save all those who discern the times of the Gentiles, watch world events, and pray. To learn more about a Gentile power that will soon amass an unthinkable 200 million man army, request our free booklet, Russia and China in Prophecy. The little book unlocks why we're now living in the times of the Gentiles. Also request our free reprint article, The Times of the Gentiles. Order now.